Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. It's the 8th of December, 2022. My name is Stan Houston. The program is Interesting Ideas in a Changing World. We've kind of enhanced our title based on, as I said yesterday, our tribute to one of my mentors, that is the late Earl Nightingale, who is probably the leader in the radio broadcasting motivational business. And I told his story and about how he had gone from a young man who lost his fear once he had escaped being on the USS Arizona when it was bombed on December 7th, 1941, on Pearl Harbor Day, as we commemorated that, and how that realization of his good fortune allowed him to live with less fear in his life and become a radio pioneer and entrepreneur. If you didn't listen to that program, you need to do it and go back. Yes, today, now that was December 7th. December 6th, we talked about St. Nicholas. This is the day that John Lennon died. He was murdered in New York City. And there are a couple reflections on that. I'll probably talk about that. And then I'll recommend you go and read a story of a gentleman about my age and stage who actually was there on that day in the radio business. And his name is Fred Jacobs, and he has a remarkable story. And I'll send you his way and hear his story. And then I want to encourage you, because we talked about, is it time to quit? Well, it may be time to quit thinking the same way about your job, your work, your career, your business. And may I just make a couple recommendations, maybe some suggestions about a little different way of viewing your work life starting in these changing times in 23. I'm Stan Houston. The program is Interesting Ideas, and it begins right now. Well, here we go. A colleague of mine, he's in the radio business, so I call him a colleague, because we're not in competition, really. We're collegial. We're trying to make this media work for the benefit and the best of all. And I enjoy listening and reading some of the things he says. And he was in New York City that day. Let me just give you a brief sample of what he says in an article which I'll suggest you read. The death of John Lennon on this day 42 years ago rocked my world like suddenly losing a relative or a good friend. And today's post is a trip more than 4 decades ago to that fateful Hard Day's night. In some ways, for me, it was the day the music died, or at least its mortality got all too real. Like every day these days, today will be another day in the news cycle. The economy, missing documents, a faraway war, court cases and trials, and sadly a good chance for more senseless killings like Lennon's way back on a crispy, cool night in New York City more than 4 decades ago. John was a complicated man, but he was also simple at the same time. At the time of his death, his and Yoko's period of enlightenment here in the United States seemed to be blossoming. All the while, he seemed to be trying to convince us that love is all you need. If you get a moment, listen to some Lennon and his Fab Four band today. Hopefully, you'll hear a few songs on the radio today. My playlist appears at the end of this post, and there's a lot to choose from. Here's a story I haven't told before in this blog. On the 40th anniversary of the assassination of John Lennon, it seems like a good time to tell it. On this date in 1980, I had recently moved to New York City working for ABC Radio. I had been transferred from WRIF in Detroit, having never lived in Manhattan, I wanted to be in the city and found an apartment on West 73rd Street and Central Park West. The reason that's significant is that as one block over, the famous Dakota condo building loomed large over Central Park, home to many celebrities from all walks of life, including John and Yoko. Over the years, Boris Karloff, Rosie O'Donnell, Judy Garland, Joe Namath, and scores of other famous names took up residency in the Dakota. The horror film Rosemary's Baby, boy, we're going back in time, aren't we, was set there, the perfect location and look for a building that loomed over the Upper West Side landscape, even as taller structures were built nearby. I became fascinated by the Dakota, walking past it several times each day on my way to and from work, and always wondering what rock and roll's #1 power couple were up to. I never did spot either John or Yoko on the street, but they both freely moved about the city, along with millions of their neighbors. Just a couple of months into my adventure in New York City, I started reading books about the Dakota. It turned out to be a building that had a rich history. It got its names because when it was built 100 years earlier in 1880, West 72nd Street was thought to be way out in the middle of nowhere, like the Dakotas, and the name stuck. One of my favorite books was a great sci-fi novel, Time and Again, by the great Jack Finney, who was also the author of The Body Snatchers that turned into a couple of hit films. It's a wonderful story about how a modern-day New Yorker goes back in time by sitting in a special apartment in the Dakota and looking down on Central Park. He is swept back to the era when the landmark was first built, an exciting adventure, and gave readers a feel for what Manhattan was like a century earlier. Well, I'll let it go at that. Perhaps I've got your curiosity up. And by the way, you can email me at stanhouston@gmail.com, stanhouston@gmail.com. And I'm a regular subscriber to Fred's post, and I'd be happy to forward that on to you. Once again, stanhouston@gmail.com. It was 42 years ago today, the story of John Lennon and that terrible tragedy, which I remember very well too, even though at that time I was doing radio work in the Southern Caribbean, and I remember reporting it on the news, and obviously an icon from my childhood had died that day, so I remember it quite well too. By the way, I actually put together a series of a couple coaching programs, and it said everything you wanted to know about business you can learn from the Beatles. Well, it's not everything, but I actually put together an idea where I said, studying the Beatles, you can learn a great deal about being a business entrepreneur, because they truly were business innovators and entrepreneurs. And perhaps I could dig that old chestnut up and take it out of the fire and maybe recycle it in these times. Yeah, everything you wanted to learn about business, well, maybe not everything, but some good things, you can learn from that incredible innovating group, the Beatles. Just something to think about, and perhaps a touch of nostalgia and a touch of sadness, because, what might have been. What might have been. Truly a talented, unique, and complicated man on somewhat of a spiritual journey, and it was cut short, and I wonder where it might have led him if he'd had more years to go. Interesting ideas indeed. I'm Stan Houston. We'll be right back. I have a bit of a epilogue to my program on Is It Quitting Time? That's the new book coming out. I think it just came out. I'm going to look it up. Annie Duke, Quit. And as I told you, I also did a class Again, maybe it's time to resurrect that chestnut too, called How to Quit Your Soul-Sucking Job. And it was pretty good. Sometimes I even surprise myself by looking back at some of the stuff I've done before, and I've forgotten some things, forgotten a number of things that I actually said before. Sometimes I grimace because it's, oh no. And occasionally I have the wonderful opportunity of smiling and say, hey Stan, that was pretty good. That was pretty good. But that's what life is like. And that's leading me to my final thought for this Thursday. Oftentimes you've heard the expression, life is a journey. In effect, it's not a destination. It's a journey. And of course, I can see that. And so that means that perhaps we've got a course planned out. And hopefully we will get to our destination as we take the journey. I think it would be easier right now to say something like this. Life is an adventure. And that means something very, very unique. An adventure requires you to do something risky, and you're not sure how it's going to end. Life is an adventure. You don't know how it'll work out, or where it might go, or where you will be. I love a little sign that is at the White Stallion Ranch, one of the sponsors for the Cowboy Up podcast, which we produce on What It Takes Radio. Great program. Make sure you think about that. The Cowboy Up podcast. And at the White Stallion Ranch, which is actually a historical place because so many of the celebrity movie stars of the 1940s and 50s hung out at the White Stallion Ranch. And my good friends Russell and Michael True, they are now the second and raising the third and perhaps fourth generation of people. It is truly a family business, and I've had the opportunity to work with them in the Dude Ranch Association for a number of years from my time in Tucson. And they have a sign. It goes something like this. Chess is a game. Okay. Tennis is a sport, but horseback riding is an adventure. You never know quite how it will go. We'll try and keep it safe, but you never know. And following upon that, one of the young women of the West, Bryce Albright, who is the leader of the Dude Ranch Association, raised as a young woman on the ranch and on the rodeo circuit for young people, said that her father had a line that went something like this. Horseback riding is the only sport or adventure where the ball has a mind of its own. Where the ball has a mind of its own. So horseback riding is an adventure. There have been so many things in my life that even though I am a proverbial 3% planner with lots of plans, I have to confess that I've achieved many of them and failed at just as many, if not more. And here I am, and it's still an adventure, and I'm not quite sure how it's going to work out. And so I'd encourage you to think that way and be okay that way and understand that the whole idea of faith, whether you call it religious faith or perhaps your faith in something else or some other way or maybe even in yourself, faith is the way we have to deal with the adventure that's before us. Give us this day. Guess who said that? Make my day. Guess who said that? One day at a time. Guess who says that? My friends in AA say, help me stay sober today. help me stay sober today. As a result of that, I would say that going forward, don't think of your life and your career or your job as a job. Think of it as a project. And perhaps you're going to have a number of projects in life. That's a good way of having multiple streams of income. This project, we'll see where it goes. And perhaps it'll go well. But I'm always ready to, as someone said, life has a lot of plot shifts. And when that happens, you got to find another project. So life is an adventure, and there are no jobs anymore, or even careers anymore. There are only projects. And here is my counsel to young men and women, more and more. Please view your early attempt at work. Now think about this. We say, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, let's face it. Most of us don't have a clue what we want to be when we grow up. When we're young and we have great aspirations, like I remember the person who said, I want to be a bus driver. And that was so wonderful. They were young and they loved riding the bus with their mother. And when I asked him, what do you want to be? He said, I want to drive a bus. And I still remember walking along on Grand Central Station, Union Station in Chicago, having gotten off the train with my parents from Minot, North Dakota to Chicago to visit my grandmother in Illinois. And as I rode up there, I looked up at the engineer sitting in that great northern big diesel. And I looked up at him and he saw me and he smiled and waved at me. And I thought, wow, I wonder if maybe someday I could drive a great northern diesel locomotive. But isn't that wonderful? What some people would think of as ordinary jobs, we as children thought were very, very good and glamorous. And you know, we got it more right when we thought that than when we aspire to, quote, some of the bigger, more important jobs. How could we be so foolish, so old, and so smart, so young? But think of your job as a young person. And this is how I'm coaching both of my children. I did, and they're fully adults now. And my grandson, think of your first work experiences as simply experiments. Experiments never fail. They don't work out, but you learn something and you move on to the next one. Think of your first jobs as experiments. And we're done. I hope this 20 minutes has been maybe inspiring, useful, entertaining, maybe thoughtful. There's a lot of things I talked about that maybe I could talk to you more about, but please reach out to me. I'm Stan Houston. This is Interesting Ideas for Your Changing World. We'll be back. We'll be back simply to say one of the things you should do in 23 is exactly what I'm doing. You should share your wisdom, insight, and truth. One time in my life, I actually said I'd love to own my own radio station. I could never afford it then. I can't afford it now, but I have one. And you know what? I can reach just about as many people as any radio station I could have bought for $10, $15, $25, $30 million if I had it. So if you'd like to think about how your business, your next project could be something, or your encore project. That's right. You're ready for your encore project. We'll be glad to help you get there. Reach out to me at stanhusted@gmail.com, stanhusted@gmail.com. Check us out at witradio.net, witradio.net. Or if you want to have some fun, just go to YouTube and put in Stan Husted, and there's probably about 1,000 videos there. And who knows, the one that shows up might be providentially just for you. Thank you for your time. Best and blessings to you. By God's good grace, we'll have another day tomorrow, and we'll see what Friday brings. Take care. All the best. Blessings to you and your family. May your disruptions be small, and may you rest well this evening. Bye for now.